Yeah, so our A feature in this magnificent double feature that we are about to embark on is a movie that John Negroni, but the host of the Cinemaholics main show, all but refused to talk about, but I would not let that stop me. And when I saw that this movie was on the list to be discussed this month, there was no one else other than Tyler that I wanted to discuss it with. And here we are. It is, of course, from 1975, celebrating its 45th anniversary and still going strong. It is the all time classic, Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
It's one of the best films ever made, in my personal opinion.
You know what? We share that opinion very fervently, and we actually have a history with this movie in particular. So I'm curious to talk about that. But first, I want to know, Tyler, in my opinion, anyone who's anyone has a story of when they first saw Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Tyler, I'm wondering, what is yours?
Oh boy, wow, that's walking down memory lane. I would think probably the late '90s. I must have been like 6.
Goodness.
Yeah, I know. Oh, before your time.
I was
long time ago.
Born yet? Yeah.
Oh God. Oh, but yeah, it was a minute ago, and I mean, I must have been 5 or 6, and the the culture of my family was always like, the parents are doing their thing, and the kids just happen to be nearby. And so like movies would be put on, like Rocky Horror Picture Show, and like, we wouldn't be engaged in watching it. Yeah, but we would pick up on a few things, but of course most of it go right over our heads just because we didn't have any awareness of it. But like watching that movie and then only picking up very brief little things like the Black Knight, where it's like graphic and that like sticks out. Like I didn't understand the comedy or the humor. I couldn't read, so I wasn't picking up on like the Norwegian jokes in the beginning. Yeah, the faults in the subtitles. I mean, yeah, it was a very young experience, and I didn't really get it until probably maybe middle school. So whenever it really started to become prominent, like the jokes would be passed around the friend group a little bit more frequently. And yeah, I mean, like, so I guess around 13 or 14, I would consider that my first real viewing with an adult angle and understanding the jokes.
And I'm sure it's been many a viewing since that time.
Just an absurd amount. Oh my God. Every family holiday, whether it be Christmas, Valentine's, doesn't matter. Always putting
Flag
out
Day.
a movie on. Flag Day. Hey, you know what? Canada's got to watch it too. So we got to spread all that love to them. Absolutely. But yeah, I mean, it's an all-time classic. Yeah, so I mean, like it's invariably one of those movies that you don't feel like you've wasted any time, no matter how many times you've seen it. It is, it's timeless, and each viewing you seem to gain a little bit more. Each one's just a little bit funnier than the last, just because it's echoing through your nostalgia and being good on its own. So yeah, I definitely think that it's one of my favorite movies, at least.
You're absolutely right when you say that every viewing sort of compounds on the previous one. I would say, and this is no exaggeration whatsoever, I would predict that I have seen this upwards of 36 times in my life. And I actually I first saw it later in life than a lot of people did. I'll never forget. It was 2009. Remember those days? Those were good times.
Oh.
I was 10 years old.
Oh boy. Little boy.
And I was on a vacation, a family reunion in the state of Delaware. And I remember the topic of Monty Python and the Holy Grail came up organically with my cousin, who I hang out with all the time, still to this day. And I mentioned that I've never heard of that. What is that? And my cousin, and indeed many of my extended family, looked at me like I was the freaking devil because I had never seen this movie before. They were like, you have to watch it immediately. And to this day, I have no idea why, but someone had a DVD copy of it that they brought with them on this vacation to Delaware. And of course, there was a DVD player upstairs. And so we threw it on. I remember we had this horrible tasting caramel corn from this boardwalk down the road. And my life was never the same after that. It was the funniest thing I'd ever seen at that point. And I think the joke that I still remember seeing on that first viewing and thinking was the funniest joke in the movie. I oscillate wildly every single time I see it. A new joke sticks out at me, but the very first one that I said that is the funniest moment ever was when Sir Lancelot runs up to the castle like 5 times, and it's the same shot over and over and over again. I'll never forget see that for the first time and just hearing that like sort of low pitched drum beat as it happens over and over as the guards just stare into the distance wondering what the hell is going on. It's one of the funniest moments ever, and indeed this movie has many of them. And before we talk about the history, I want to sort of jump around a little bit. I want to get to sort of the legacy of this movie, which, as everyone listening probably knows, it is hailed as a comedy classic, and rightfully so, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. I mean, any movie worth its salt will probably look back and look at Monty Python's Holy Grail and kind of see some inspiration, just because every kind of humor laid out possible is like, it's so well done, and so many checks and so many boxes as far as like what kind of humor is being delivered. It's oh, très bon. It is so good.
It's actually funny that you brought up Rocky Horror earlier, because I feel like it's actually adopted kind of a similar legacy, especially when it comes to the very specific cult status, the way that it gets shown all the time in theaters. Of course, when theaters are open and operating, you'd see this played all the time. As a matter of fact, I have seen this movie in theaters twice, and I don't know. I know you've seen it in theaters at least once. Was that the only time?
Yeah. I mean, that's the first time that I ever got to see it in a theater.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for me personally, this was the first viewing that I had seen of a public one, but I do know exactly what you mean about the cult following, because Rocky Horror Picture Show, like you were saying, like people, even my dad would go to showings and he'd show up cross-dressed, and I mean, like they'd be throwing all different kinds of stuff out in the crowd, and like, it's in the culture, the psyche of, everybody who watches it at least once. It's like embedded in there. And like the same thing definitely goes with Monty Python. It's one of those movies that no matter how old it gets, it's still something that people can enjoy. It's timeless. And there are very few movies that like really can do that are comedies, because most jokes kind of start dying out after a while. Some become too
Mm-hmm.
racy, some of them just aren't applicable anymore. But like it's just a nice even coating of just flat out hilariousness throughout the entire movie, start to finish.
You're absolutely right. Sometimes in what happens in comedies is that, especially more modern ones, is that sort of the shock value of it goes away immediately after the first viewing. Sometimes even during the first viewing, it doesn't even hit. So it's impossible to go back and get that same effect. When meanwhile, here we are. This is our what 20th, 30th viewing of Holy Grail, and we're still loving it. And that is why we it has those screenings all the time where people go and see it and they quote along to it and they're encouraged to. The first time I saw this in theaters was, I want to say, 2016, somewhere around there, and I saw they were having a quote along at the theater that I went to all the time, and I was like, oh hell yeah, because by that point I all but memorized the movie. And so I went there, and there were about 5 people in the audience, and none of them I realized immediately, none of them knew the movie. Like they
Oh
could
god.
not quote along with it. So there I was in the way back trying to like, get some energy into the theater, and it just was not working. And so, but eventually I just sort of settled in and was like, well, screw it. I'll just get to watch Holy Grail. There's no loss here. But then the second time was really special, because that was when you and I and our coworker Shelby, we went to see the quote along at the theater where we worked at, and that was a ton of fun, was it not?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I mean, I've only really ever worked at the Alamo, I should say. I've done just a few viewings inside of the theaters. But being in that, quote along, and being able to use props, and like the fact that it's just like the energy is surrounding the whole thing. Like everybody wanted to be there. Everybody, like in contrast to that, those poor 5 people, like everybody in that theater was excited to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And like, it didn't matter how old or how young you were. Like there were kids, I don't remember the age policies, but like I would imagine that there were pretty young kids there.
Oh
And I
yeah.
mean, there were people as old as like 70, that were all enjoying the movie, all present in the moment. Like they weren't, distracted, partially by being around other people. Like they were engaged, even with everybody quoting along and stuff. And it was a sense of community, kind of,
Hmm.
in that like you no longer just feel like, okay, like I feel like a lot of it's family centric. Like a lot of the stuff gets passed around in quotes amongst families and stuff like it.
Hmm.
In your case, you were educated by your family, and so to see all these different people and to see how widespread, how many other families actually like hold it dear was nice. It was really nice. It was particularly heartwarming.
I really love that. I'll never forget when we got there. We were one of the last people to show up, and they had this table outside the theater that they were handing out like inflatable swords and stuff. And then they had this tub of coconuts, and they only had one coconut left. Do you remember this? And so
Oh yes.
we had to somehow divide the two halves of coconut between the three of us, and but we made it work. We were able to sort of bang it against the table, and just to hear a whole theater hitting the coconuts against their tables and is something that I will never forget.
Oh my gosh, yes. Yeah, I mean, it was like, it was wonderful. It was like, I applaud Alamo at like organizing those kinds of things and like making it, even more fun for a movie that's already amazing to begin with. But
Mhm.
yeah, like amongst like the little group that we had where each one of us already loved the movie to begin with, surrounded by people who also enjoyed it and loved it, and getting to do the things that are like quirky and fun and that you wouldn't that you would contrast very heavily with like a normal movie theater where everything's quiet and you're sitting in your seat and you're just there to like observe.
Mhm.
um but to interact with one of your favorite movies like really, brought a new experience that was just awesome. I mean, it was straight up awesome. I loved it.
It's not a movie that invites a lot of dissection per se. I think
Oh
it's not a
yeah.
complicated movie, but there's actually a lot that went into it. And the first thing is something I actually only found out the other night when I rewatched it. I don't know about you, Tyler, but in the times that you've seen it in the past, was there a joke at the beginning where they started to play an episode of a television show called Dentist on the Job before like abruptly switching?
Yes,
I
yes.
did not
I
realize until recently
oh,
they only have that on certain versions of the movie. Not every version has that joke at the beginning, and it is one of the funniest parts of it. I was really disappointed to find that out.
oh my God. Yeah, I didn't even think about that. Like, I remember, yeah, the dentist, like the delivery truck or something with a giant
Hmm.
tooth on it. Because like
Yeah.
when I was young, like during one of the pre middle school days, so still too young to really get it. Like I remember my dad putting it on or something, and it opened up to the dentist scene, and I was like, "What is this?" I don't remember this. This isn't like Monty Python at all. This isn't. There's no people on horses or fake horses. There's no
Yeah.
nothing. It's a dentist episode. And then my dad was like,
And
"No,
it
just
goes on for a
give it a moment."
really long time.
It
They play
does.
the entire opening credit sequence, which is like a good minute and a half probably, and then suddenly just as the actual hypothetical episode is getting started, we hear this sound like it's the wrong bloody film, and then we hear "Dude." I was so
Oh,
upset that that wasn't in the Blu-ray that I got a few years ago. I guess it's in the DVD from like 2005. I want to say I forget exactly when it came out, but yeah, I was really upset about that. So that is as far as I know, that's the only thing that is not consistent across all versions.
yeah, that's so curious though. I mean, I wonder why they took that out. Because I mean, that's like, unless, well, knowing Monty Python, they wouldn't use anything that couldn't be, picked up by anybody else.
Mhm.
So I don't understand why they would take that out in
It's really
retrospect.
strange. Maybe the
Yeah,
rights reverted to someone else in the ensuing years. It could be anything, but for whatever
yeah.
reason. they've taken that out, and shame on them for doing so, because
I guess that would be kind of an interesting way to like, form the casts of Monty Python viewers. Is like, okay, are you the dentist episode or not? And then the people who are like, what? You'll be like, you don't
yeah,
know. You're not in this. You don't know the original Monty Python. Oh my
I mean,
gosh.
it's gatekeeping on the basis of one joke that's incidentally removed from some versions of the movie. I can see it. There are there
Oh
are
yeah.
there are more absurd things going on in that department out there. But regardless, we could sort of talk about the making of it as we go along. But Tyler, I'm curious, what is there? There are so many good, hilarious parts of this movie. What is one that maybe sticks in your mind a little more than others? Like, what would you consider your favorite or one of your favorite set pieces of the movie itself?
I think the adult part of me really enjoys the witch scene probably the most.
Yes, yes,
Um, just everything about it and like having them all piece it together. It was just it's so well written and like like if you do have a little understanding of history, like you do know how absurd it was, and so for
yeah,
them to be putting it together this way just makes it even more like it's such a like a keyhole moment of like, oh, I really understand. Like this is absolutely stupid, and this is exactly what they're trying to say. Um, but like everything about it, from like, well, we did do the nose
yeah.
and the hat.
Oh, she has got a wart. That's my
What?
favorite part.
And then the classic, like the all time classic joke that I would always throw around as a kid was like, she turned me into a newt. A
Yeah,
newt? Well, I got better.
yeah,
That would always be passed around in my family. Like we would have other jokes and stuff like throw me the whip, throw me the idol, but like the newt one stuck and just ran forever and still runs to this day. Like anytime somebody says like she turned me into a newt, like everybody in the family can chime in and say exactly what follows up with it.
and John Cleese really nails that. And as a matter of fact, I think as according to my research, John Cleese was actually like his pauses during that scene almost disrupted the entire thing. You'll notice there's a part where Sir Bedivere asks a question and none of them can think of an answer right away. Look at Eric Idle in that scene. He bites the scythe that he's holding. And for the longest time, I was like, why is he biting the scythe? That's really strange. Turns out he was about to burst out laughing. And it was only because he did that that he was able to sort of stifle it and wait for John Cleese to say, because she's made of wood or something like that.
I could totally see that. I mean, talking more about like the behind the scenes thing. Like the first thing that I ever noticed that was like out of place in the movie was the scene with the guys who hit themselves in the head with the books.
The monks, yeah.
The monks, yeah, the chanting monks. Because I think that's the scene right leading up into the witch scene, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's the
Yeah.
exact same scene. We see it's Dennis, the repressed peasant, immediately goes to the Black Knight and then to the monks. So it's really early in the movie.
Okay, yeah. And like it was the one dude who like as the procession is like moving around the corner, like there's one dude who just nails him in this head too like just a little bit too hard. And you
Oh,
see him like
really?
stumble and then come back and then like he keeps on walking. And it's like I
You're
remember
kidding me.
watching that. I promise you that.
I've never noticed that.
It is it's one of those things that like as a kid I was just sitting there watching it and I just happened to be looking in the right place at the right time and like I see him, he nails himself in the head and like he stumbles, he takes a step or two to the left and then he comes back into the line and I'm like what happened, like I don't understand. Oh, excuse me. But yeah, like it was so quirky and out of place because like again as a kid you don't really understand that these people are actors. So you don't expect that to happen. So like continuity errors or goofs like that just like really strike you specifically. And that was the only one that I really noticed. But yeah, the biting the scythe, I think that that's like one of the best goofs though, is like if somebody's containing their laughter and they're like dying on the inside and then you can tell that just it makes my heart so warm. Oh my
Yeah.
God.
That's one of my
like
favorite things is when we're going to mention SNL a little bit later in the show, but it's those moments when they break, when they almost break, and you can tell it's taking everything that they can. It actually really humanizes them, because we've all had that
Yes.
time when we're not supposed to laugh, but we cannot help ourselves, and it is remarkably relatable. And I always love seeing that, especially as I was on a improv team for several years, and that would happen all the time where we would have to just the show must go on. It doesn't matter how funny this is. We got to repress it. We got to push it down. And so when we see that peek through, it is just hilarious, and I love seeing it every time.
Oh yes. I mean, like how can I phrase this? When I was a kid, I was far less interested in the movie itself than the bloopers at the end of
Hmm.
anything, because it was something where it's like, for me, I'm one of those people that I like to peek behind the curtain. I like to see the behind the scenes. Like if we go to Disney World, I want to pay the extra buck to go underground and see all the stuff that makes the town basically run. And watching actors do the serious scenes that I just saw them do, not even a half hour ago, and just completely bust out laughing. It really does. It makes them so human. It brings out the element of of true humanity, of really understanding this person is just doing a job, and that regardless of how serious they may seem, it took them quite a few shots to just do this one scene because they kept breaking or whatever the case was.
Yeah.
I love that to death.
Since we're talking about sort of the happy accidents and just little human error in this movie, I was amazed to find this out. We mentioned the coconuts earlier, how they don't have actual horses. They just have, to quote the knight yelling down from the castle, you got 2 empty halves of coconut and you're banging them together. They have that throughout the whole movie. Turns out that was an accident. They had horses initially, but they realized it was impractical to shoot. The horses were misbehaving and stuff, and it was too expensive. So they said, what if we just get coconuts instead? Like the shark breaking on Jaws, it is one of the greatest accidents in movie history that happened, because it makes for one of the funniest jokes in the movie, which is the very first scene where the guard just gets so hung up on how the coconut could possibly get to England. By the way, we never find out where the coconut came from, which is even funnier to me. They
Oh
never
yeah,
answered the question of where they got the coconut. They
we
say they
found
found
them.
it, yeah, but for all we know, they're lying. So that I never noticed that until this viewing. So I do have a theory later on that might answer that. But regardless, that was amazing to find out that almost wasn't a joke in the movie. And you wonder what kind of butterfly effect kind of nonsense would have happened if they had managed to have actual horses in the movie.
Oh
I imagine
man.
it'd be about equally as funny, but still, I'm glad that it turned out the way it did.
Oh, definitely. I mean, the coconuts give it a particular theme, I think, of just truly not taking itself seriously. I
Mm-hmm.
think that if they had gone with the horses, it wouldn't have been as unique as just its own niche in the cinema world.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
think they
there's
did
no
a
other movie like that. There's actually a few things that this movie does that no others that I can think of do. For instance, Tyler, can you think of another comedy in which there's a scene where, and I'm sure there's one out there, but where there's a scene where a character has the hiccups incidentally, and it makes for some really funny, just extra stuff to fill the frame? Because when Graham Chapman as the guard with Eric Idle arguing with Michael Palin about, no, you stay in the room and make sure he doesn't leave, and every once in a while there's Graham Chapman just I cannot think of any other movie that has that joke, and it's so obvious, and it's because we all know how overpowering hiccups can be. They're relentless sometimes. Just that they put that in makes me smile every single time. And as a matter of fact, in high school, we actually did that scene. I played the Eric Idle character. My friend was Michael Palin. And then we had someone who had to specifically time the hiccups. And it's harder than it sounds. That always
Yeah.
brings me joy, that scene.
Oh man, I completely agree. I think that I can't think of it. I can't think of another film that utilizes hiccups to drive home comedic messages and stuff. But it was something that unlike fart humor, fart humor gets passed around, nobody's business.
Yeah.
It's been there, done that. But like hiccups are like untapped gold, untapped
It
comedic gold.
is. It really
And
is.
and using it in a way that isn't like tacky, or it's not like gapingly obvious that you're trying to make a joke. It's like if you just slap in like I bet you there was maybe 3 or 4 hiccups, right? Some
Hmm.
small number. So it's just like kind of tossed in there enough, like an expert seasoning from a well experienced chef.
Yeah.
It was gold.
Absolutely. So we've mentioned a few other scenes throughout the movie. What's another one that we haven't mentioned yet that is worth note?
The Black Knight scene is probably one of my absolute favorites for the simple fact that like this is one of the things that I absolutely love is whenever serious things get made funny. So as to
Hmm.
say, like you have this stalwart knight who just refuses to budge, he's super honorable, won't do anything, but
Yeah.
then you cut his
You
arm
make me
off and
sad.
he's
So be
you'll
it.
make me sad. So yeah,
I
like
quote
you've got
that
this
line in my head on a daily basis, by the way.
the first one that comes to me is like, oh, we'll call it a draw. It's like he
Yeah.
just won't give up. He's just like incessant, and it's so good. Like I mean, I'm not necessarily a comedian myself. Like I can't write jokes, but that is something that like, wow, that is expert craftsmanship. Just taking something, and even if it's just a simple idea, like just cutting this dude's arms off and legs off, and now he's armless and legless, and he's sitting there and still barking at this person that they need to give up. And it's
Yeah.
just like, it's something where it you can't help but laugh. You really can't. Like I don't think I've seen anybody be able to hold a straight face through it.
One of my favorite parts of that scene that always makes me laugh is not even the fact that the limbs get cut off just one by one, but it's the way they get cut off. And it's so obviously fake, but it's also so distinct because the way it happens every time King Arthur like dodges a swing of the sword by the Black Knight and then very lightly just sort of touches his sword to the Black Knight's shoulder or something, and then there's like this whoosh sound effect. The arm falls off immediately, and then just
Oh,
this comically bright red blood just starts spraying out. It always gets me every single time. The ease with which
oh,
these limbs are able to be sliced off, especially because it's just following that really brutal fight scene between the Green Knight, played by Terry Gilliam in a suit of armor, and the Black Knight, where the sword just goes through the helmet into the guy's head, and the Black Knight just comes off and pries it out, and like has to brace the helmet on his foot. It is every image of this movie is burned into my brain, and yet it's still hilarious to me. And that's one of the many occasions throughout the movie where we see not only are they sort of poking fun at that medieval milieu, just sort of the old ages kind of Knights of the Round Table kind of thing, but they're just humiliating everyone and everything in their path, including themselves. Like
oh yeah.
it really comes through that these are just man children playing dress up, not really having any idea what they're talking about. The history isn't even accurate. I found out it says 932 AD at the very beginning of the movie. That was
Mhm.
about 400 to 500 years after King Arthur was supposedly alive. So they're not even getting that right. But also just the weird, what's the word, anachronisms with, actual the police showing up at the very end and everything. It is
Oh
this
yes.
very not even satirical. It's certainly a parody, but at their own expense, which I really admire.
I think that it picks up on a very specific like Monty Python kind of way of doing humor where it's kind of meta, where it's like you were saying, the police scene at the very end where it's like, okay, you've been living this whole movie where they're in the medieval times, like they're using the holy hand grenade of Antioch, so like a little bit of like input from modern day, but then
The holy hand grenade.
exactly, yes. And so
Yeah.
like the imprint though of like the thing that sets up that final scene was like the librarian or the narrator
A
standing out there
famous
and he's like,
historian. Yes.
yeah, famous historian. And he gets his head cut off or whatever. And And so like the police show up and everything, and like that doesn't get talked about for the entirety of the movie.
Yeah.
And then at the very end, it comes up. It's like, all right, come with me, all of you, come with me. You put that down. It's one of those things where it's like they blend in, like it's not within the context of the story. Like it's breaking the fourth wall and doing it in a way that isn't, it's still carrying the comedy along. It's not jarring. It's not something that's like, interrupting the humor or the tempo of the story or anything. It's just elegantly put in there, and it's I can't love it enough. Oh,
I can't get enough of it either. And it's, yeah, what you're mentioning, it actually has a couple of layers because you do get the sense for a while at least that this is actually medieval times, just a weird comedic version of it that's been warped through the Python lens, which is, and they do this in Life of Brian too. It seems like their sort of operational ethos for doing these period piece comedies is, okay, so we've seen movies like this before. We've seen movies about maybe not King Arthur specifically, but this time period before. We've seen movies about Jesus Christ before. What scenes didn't make it in? Like, that's like, what are the events that had to have happened, but that no one's interested in seeing in a movie? Like, I think specifically of the Bring Out Your Dead scene. You have this guy just sort of haggling with a dead collector with a guy who's actually not quite dead yet. And that must have happened at some point, but that's just not interesting to most filmmakers. And they choose to take that hypothetical moment in history and flesh it out into just a bit, just a comedy bit, and then make a whole movie of those. And I love that it all amounts to such a consistently funny end product. I read this fact, and I can't necessarily corroborate it, but I have no reason to believe otherwise. Someone watched the movie, they counted every joke and divided it by the runtime, and found out there is a joke on average every 10 and a half seconds in the movie, which I believe 100%. I'm actually surprised it's that long.
oh my gosh.
And so you can tell they really just put everything into this. And it was a really, really hard production, too, especially compared to Life of Brian and stuff. So it's a miracle that it turned out to be the funniest movie of all time, I say, by and large.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I didn't know they had difficulties behind their shooting. I mean, was it just like due to weather and stuff?
It was a few things. It was the locations that they had. They were shooting mostly in Scotland. The scene where John Cleese as Tim the Enchanter is standing on that mountain, like casting flames everywhere. John Cleese actually got up on that mountain with like a crane or a ladder or something like that. And it was this immensely precarious fall that very easily could have killed or maimed him. And there was a wind that day too, so they spared no expense either. And this actually ties into our second movie. But Graham Chapman is, you probably know this already, but struggled with alcoholism for a lot of his life, and because they were in such a remote location, he couldn't like get his fix. Like he couldn't get his alcohol fix. And so on the first day of shooting, one of the first scenes they shot actually was King Arthur crossing the Bridge of Doom. It turns out Graham Chapman actually couldn't do it because he had acrophobia. He was too scared. He was shaky from like alcohol withdrawal. So they actually had a stunt double do that. And it was a really hard time. And so it's one of the movies that actually led him to becoming sober later on. So at least that's a good thing. But yeah, they all hated it. Like they're not shy about it at all. It was a really brutal production, as it turns out.
Well, dang. I mean, it certainly made a diamond though through all that stress. It's I don't even know how to explain it. Like the movie itself was so well done. And I mean, like even with such terrible conditions and stuff like that, it seems that every 10 seconds there's a joke. Each joke hit home. It was a home run. There were no weak shots amongst any of it. Like each scene holds its own. Each one is able to like stand the test of time too. So like I mean, I find it very hard to find a fault in the movie, honestly. Like I can't really think of any criticism that I could give it besides positive criticism. I mean, can you think of anything? Like if you had to change anything?
I have a couple, but it's nothing that sinks the movie by any means. And it's mostly just as a byproduct of seeing it so many times, you start to notice these little holes in the story. For instance, and this is actually not a new thing. I've always thought this. It's so strange to me the way that they get from the Bridge of Death or the Bridge of Doom, I forget what it is. The way they get from that scene to the castle is really weirdly contrived, where they cross the bridge. They can't find Lancelot because he's been arrested, as it turns out, which is hilarious. And then, with no explanation whatsoever, they get this like call from the heavens and just start walking in this direction, and a boat shows up. I'm like, wait, what? Like there's no transition there, and it's always been strange to me. It's almost as if they couldn't think of a bit to get them to the boat, except to say that there was this call from the heavens and this like angelic music plays, and King Arthur and Sir Bedivere just walk and find this like dragon boat and stuff, and then they get to the castle. And then the funniest part is that, and my brother pointed this out the other night, is that they see the French knight is still there, and then they retreat from the castle, and they walk across the waters. So it's like not even that deep, and they didn't even need the boat. That's just a nitpick, though. That's always gotten me, and just sort of that entire second exchange with the French knight. I've never found it particularly funny. It's probably the one bunch of jokes that I don't think work especially well. It's just sort of, it feels like a lot of recycled insults from that first hilarious encounter, but it's the very end of the movie and it doesn't even last that long. So it doesn't bother me, but it is something that I find with every viewing, I'm like, okay, I'm sort of checking out a little bit at this point. Just that specific chunk of jokes sometimes falters a little bit, but that's all I got off the top of my head, besides weird inconsistencies that were clearly intentional.
Yeah, I mean, like, the way that I kind of see it is that, and this will be for the second movie that we'll discuss, the quest and, the premise of it being on this divine quest. And how in Monty Python, like, they're finding the Holy Grail, like, they're getting to the end, they've gotten to the castle, like, they've done all the stuff, they've lost everybody in the process. Who's at the very end but the Frenchmen? Like, they're already there. And they're not even using anything witty, they're just using the same recycled jokes. They're literally pouring poop off the top of it. Like, and the whole premise of the quest has just been squashed. And so, like, they turn around, they're like, all right, fine. Like, they just bring out, like, hundreds of people out of nowhere, and they all start running towards it, and, like, they're gonna like, finish the quest now. Like, this is, like, no more playing around. And then cops show up, bust everybody. Yeah. So I think
it absolutely makes sense in the context of the movie, just to put a button on that sort of humiliation of the very premise that's been going on since the very beginning. So it totally makes sense. It's just comedically, I've always thought that it sort of loses a little momentum. But yeah, I totally get what you're saying.
They could have implemented novel jokes in there, or novel interactions or stuff like that. But I do think that was kind of like part of the joke of itself was to make it as, like, humiliating as possible because they're not saying anything new. Yeah, I mean, I could definitely see them changing it up, and it might be better, it might be worse, who knows. But I definitely think that for what it is, and as it stands right now, like, even the little things, like the wading through the water, I didn't notice that. And I mean, the more I think about it, it's like, damn, that's like, if they intended to do that, that's like a little tiny, like when people make movies that have, like, the little tiny things that you really have to be looking for, like the nuggets, the diamonds in the rough. Yeah. I love those. I love those so much. And, like, I guess this continues to prove that, like, you can watch it 1,000 times and then still find new jokes, new things to enjoy.
Having seen it as many times as I have, there are so many little details that took me so long to notice, but now I can never not pay attention to them. The one I always go to is when Sir Lancelot is rampaging through Swamp Castle on the way to rescue Prince Herbert. He runs in and he cuts down the stand that the band is playing on, and they fall to the floor. But if you look really closely, one of the band members is completely unfazed, gets up and keeps playing, like, the violin or whatever. And it's a blink and you miss it kind of thing. But I remember when I first noticed that, I was like, hey, look at that. That is just one more thing for me to appreciate every single time. And so to this day, whenever I watch that scene, I make sure to pay attention. It's in the bottom right corner of the screen. And I'm like, there it is. There's the guy who gave it to him that day.
The more I think about it, this is kind of like in the producers, like they take the movie that's supposed to be very serious and everything, and it through almost taking it too seriously, like it becomes funny, or I'm not sure how to explain this, but like the fact is like in that situation, like if he had just fallen, it would have been funny. It would have been funny all on its own. If he'd fallen and not gotten back up. But the fact that he got up, and that may or may not have been intentional, just elevates the funniness. And so like it could be completely on accident, or it could be completely on purpose, who knows, but like it makes the movie that much more enjoyable.
Yeah.
Because of those little things where it's like you were saying, blink and you miss it. I struggle to find any other details that I can immediately think of off the top of my head. This is just taking me down memory lane. Oh,
a lot of good memories. Yeah, it's they really go the extra mile at every possible opportunity. Like in that same scene I was just talking about, if Sir Lancelot, if everyone's singing, if Sir Lancelot had grabbed that rope and swung off of the staircase and crashed into something, that would have been enough. But that he adds in a little, excuse me, could someone give me a push, please? Is just the cherry on top. And the weird thing is that in the Blu-ray I watched last night, I don't know what happened, but that line gets drowned out by the sound of people singing. I don't know what happened. I think someone screwed up, so that joke is kind of garbled and lost. But again, it's that thing we were talking about earlier. Like, oh yeah, the real ones know about the good jokes that were edited out as time went on.
That'll be sad in some respects. Like I really wish it may be possible, but to like find completely original copy, dentist with the lack of sound editing. If that exists, I would love to hold on to that and like pass on to Anthony and be like, look, this is the true nature of what it means to be a Monty Python. You've got to watch it in its original form.
Yeah.
We're not using this placated GMO style, Monty Python that people might know nowadays.
Oh, I love it. That's a great way to put it. Yeah, this is really kind of the bastardized version of the original thing. And by the way, in case you were wondering, when the world gets back to normal, I am going to teach your son, Anthony, how to say, but father, don't you worry.
Is it bad that I was already thinking about doing that? I already do that around him. I'm like, but father.
Hoping that he'll just copy it.
Oh, yeah. I'm praying for the day. And subtly slipping in like every so often like a British accent just to make sure that he gets it all the way through. It's like, but father, I want to sing.
Stop that. Oh my gosh, I love that scene so much. That reminds me of another small detail that I love, and it's one that everyone misses for whatever reason, because I guess it's just immediately following another joke, but it's when Sir Lancelot shows up and says, oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were a lady, you see? And then the king comes back and says to Sir Lancelot, who are you? And then Prince Herbert says, I'm your son. No, not you. That always gets me so much, and everyone forgets that it's there. It's just one of those little things, like when he calls him Alice by accident for whatever reason. And then earlier in the scene when Prince Herbert says, but mother. No, I'm father. But father. Gosh, every moment is a treasure trove of hilarious stuff, and we haven't even talked about all of them. So I want to know, we're sort of winding down a little bit here, but what did we miss? Like we didn't mention the Knights of the Round Table song, which is just hilarious.
Classic.
Always got me.
Oh yes, I mean, like, talk about like the whole serious becoming not serious thing, like, Camelot. I was only a model. But yeah, so like the whole premise and like leading up to that, and then you see inside of the castle and you've got all these people just like dancing and singing crazy songs and stuff. And so, the fact that the characters then go ahead and go like, let's not go to Camelot, it's a silly place.
Yeah.
It's like, it's so, I don't know, like I could have seen any other film like actually having them go into the castle then afterwards, and then like
Mm.
continuing on with jokes or something. They're kind of like magicians. It's a lot of like sleight of hand. It's like misleading. Every twist and turn, it's like you get pulled up into something
Yes.
else. Like
Yes.
the joke gets twisted a little bit.
Yes.
So it's just like a constantly evolving beast that somehow is able to like also be recursive and like take jokes from half an hour earlier or whatever and slip it
Mhm.
in there just slyly enough or just blatantly enough to like get the funnies out.
My just to I just want to mention real fast, my favorite instance of that where they sort of redirect your attention is right before the tale of Sir Lancelot, when it says the tale of Sir Lancelot, and the guy's going to scribble in the last part of the T, and then there's like a shockwave and colors all over it, and it turns out that's actually an animated guy, and outside is the sun and the clouds jumping up and down. That always, and like just going down every single flight of stairs one at a time until he falls down all of them. That always got me. And to this day, whenever I'm having trouble with like an inanimate object, I always mutter under my breath, bloody wither, every time. There are so many lines in this movie that have wormed into my brain that I use on a daily basis. The other one I use is when King Arthur and Sir Bedivere are trying to track down a shrubbery, and they're talking to that old woman, and she's like, "No, I will not tell you where a shrubbery is." And then when Arthur says, "Very well," like that delivery of "very well," I say all the time, just when I'm like, "Oh, you ain't seen nothing yet." Like just when I'm committed to something and it's not working out, but I'm gonna get it done, I say to myself, "If you will not help us, me," which is hilarious. By the way, something just occurred to me with this viewing. Why did they get the shrubbery? Like, they didn't have
Why
to
did they?
do that. They could have just left. They could have just fled the forest. But it's as if the implication is that the knights who say "ni" are like some omnipotent force that will follow them anywhere if they don't get a shrubbery. It's always hilarious. And then Roger the Shrubber shows up. I could just
Oh, it's
we could very well just probably quote this entire movie, and that would pretty much be the whole review. But yeah, do you have any lines like that you sort of say in your head all the time that have gotten in there?
Oh, yes. I mean, for me, it's like the most prominent one that I can think of is like, we're an anarcho-syndicalist commune. Like that whole bit. It's like, just because
Yeah,
some voice in bint lobbed a scimitar at you doesn't make you the sovereign king of England.
yeah.
You know, it's
I mean,
things
if
like
all
that
went
where
round, that's my favorite part.
it's all like if I'm talking to like another group of my friends where it's like, you know, we're discussing politics and stuff like that, and somebody's like calling people communists or whatever, it's like, no, we're an anarcho-syndicalist commune, you know, and it's like, you know, it always like draws the attention away from being serious to back into the not serious and being able to be humored about and stuff. And then other lines, oh boy, well, we did do the nose and the hat.
Yeah.
Like that one always comes up in some situation where like
Uh-huh.
somebody says something and it just spurs that, because a lot of it for me is like I think that there are so many lines in there that, you know, I think that it's not just an isolated incident between you and I, that like the lines get jammed into your head. Like, I mean, like
Hmm.
people know where to pick up on the joke. They know the scene. They know what's going on. Like they can tell you like who's doing what basically. And it doesn't take that many viewings. I mean, it's really impactful.
I have two more of those that happen all the time. The first one is pretty obvious. It's just, what a strange person, all the time. All the time I get that. And then the other one, and this is a weird one, but do you know that thing that happens sometimes when you're like looking around or you're doing something, and for whatever reason your eye fixes on something for like a nanosecond and then goes to something else, but you read what's on it, and then you're trying to
Hmm.
think, wait, where did I read that? Where was that? Do you know when that happens? Every time that
Yeah.
happens, I think in my head, when Sir Galahad goes to the Castle Anthrax, I have seen it. I have seen the Grail. I'm like, where is it?
So like if I'm ever like playing with Anthony or something like that, and like if he just like headbutts me in like the chin or something, like Kayla's like, "Oh, are you all right?" And I go, "I feel fine. I feel happy."
I got better.
So it got better.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are just so many good quotes in there. And like even then, like you're saying, it's like it doesn't even have to be a major line. It could
Hmm.
just be something completely on the side. And just the fact that they said it in a particular way and like you yourself know the scene and you know how funny it is in the context, like it translates so well to like saying it to people who are in the know. And yeah, like I'm sure I'll think of one later.
One that we
But
actually used a lot back in the days when we were working together was, and I'm not going to be able to do the voice. You do it way better than I do, but it's when Tim the Enchanter says, "I warned you." Every
I
time.
warned you.
Yeah, that's so good. Every time something would happen that like we knew was going to happen and they didn't listen to us, that would always be the first line that leaped to mind. And I love just that entire scene with Tim is just hilarious. I love when the staff turns into a flamethrower and a rocket launcher for no reason. He's just standing atop a mountain doing pyrotechnics day in and day out. I just love the idea that this ram-headed enchanter is there all the time, just waiting. One of my favorites. I have one more. I have one more point I want to bring up. But are there any scenes or any things that you wanted to touch on before we move on to our second feature? Because of course there's so much, but we only have so
Oh
much time
yeah.
in the day.
I mean, we could definitely make like a 3-hour podcast over, just the movie itself. But no, I think that we've done a fair amount of good touching on to Monty Python. I guess we'll move over to the next one.
Yeah. Just one last thing I want to bring up. Actually, two. First, I love that King Arthur, the sun on his armor, has a little mustache on it. It's
Yes.
one of those details
Yes.
where every single time I see it, I notice it, I think it's funny, and then I forget just in time for my next viewing. So it's like this repeated surprise that I get, like, oh yeah, the little mustache on the sun, which I think is hilarious. But also one last thing that I actually noticed with this new viewing, and this is maybe obvious to some, but it really just sort of struck me with this last time, is that in that sort of middle chunk of the movie where each knight is going on sort of their own quest, I love the way that each of those quests is sort of structured to specifically humiliate that knight. For instance, we have Sir Lancelot the Brave, and what happens in that quest is Sir Lancelot gets a note, thinks that he's going to save some betrothed princess, and rampages through the castle, killing everyone in his sight with no remorse or hesitation whatsoever, and just gets out of it scot-free. And it's just that absurd level of masculinity. We have the tale of Sir Robin, who the not quite so brave as Sir Lancelot, who gets an opportunity to fight this three-headed giant and just runs away. And to quote the minstrel played by Neil Innes, gallantly chickens out, which, oh gosh, that scene alone, that's the song that they sing at that scene, is hilarious.
Didn't he also have a chicken on his shield or his?
He has a chicken on the shield. How perfect is that?
Yes, it's perfect. And then Galahad, or is it Galahad the Pure?
Yes.
Yes, and how he goes into Castle Anthrax, which that's probably the scene that, as a kid, really didn't make any sense to me, and it
really
really
doesn't,
was.
yeah.
Yeah, and it's not until later that you go, oh, okay, all right, now I see, now I understand. Okay,
Yeah.
all of this is hypersexualized. Oh God, and he's like, I'm saving you. No, you're not.
I love that we never find out how Sir Lancelot knew to go to the castle just then, but just shows up right in the nick of time to save Sir Galahad, who has one of the funniest line deliveries in the movie, which is when Zoot goes, Dr. Piglet, Dr. Winston, they're doctors! They have a basic medical training.
Oh my God, it's
a
this entire
movie.
Thing.
And then just lastly, we have King Arthur, who is meant to be sort of the pinnacle, like just this impeccable leader who can do anything, and manages against all odds to randomly stumble upon a shrubbery and escape the knights who say knee. along with Sir Bedivere the Wise, of course. And yeah, there is just so much to this movie. Every single joke just works exactly the way it's supposed to, and I never get tired of it. And there's this weird debate out there, which, and everyone has like a very fervent side that they take of which is better or funnier or whatever you want to say between Life of Brian and Holy Grail. And I just don't have the same connection to Life of Brian. We did do John Negroni and I did an extra milestone on that last year. So this is actually the second Python movie that we've done on the show, but I'm firmly in the Holy Grail ballpark. I don't know about you.
Oh, I would agree.
Mm-hmm.
I was raised on Monty Python, the Holy Grail, and then the next one was The Meaning of Life. And
Oh,
to this
really?
day, yeah, oh yeah, for some reason, The Meaning of Life ended up on my plate fairly early, but I mean, it was still something that, like, I mean, there's nothing inherently like terrible in it, but it does poke on a lot of big concepts that aren't really meant for a younger audience. But to this day, I've yet to really sit down and give Life of Brian a good run through.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, because I did watch it a bit as a kid, or at least I should say younger. It didn't strike me the same way that the Holy Grail did. It didn't do the same thing. So I mean, for me, I'm definitely Holy Grail all the way through.
Yeah. Life of Brian, I will grant those people this. Life of Brian has more of a point to make about sort of deconstructing the idea of fanaticism and the Christian religion specifically, or just the way that it's sort of manifested over the years. But I think just pound for pound, I think Holy Grail just gets so much more comedically, at least, out of the premise.
Oh, for sure,
Yeah.
for sure. I think that like the Holy Grail is the absurdist masterpiece, and
Yep.
then Life of Brian is, the satirical message, heavily coded in comedy, but still at the very base of it, like a message to be said.
Yeah.
Um,
And then the meaning
Meanwhile,
of life is just sort of this weird variety show kind of thing that sort of sticks out among the others.
yeah, it's like a whole series of interconnected skits, like the whole pirates thing at the beginning, and like the "Can we have your liver?"
Yeah.
But yeah, I do think that out of the trio of Monty Python movies, Holy Grail definitely stands as at least my personal like top tier gold medal winner.
Yeah. I totally agree. I'm glad we're on the same page with that. Fun fact, actually, I just remember this. Meaning of Life was the first R-rated movie I ever saw, so it at least holds a special place in my heart for that reason.